Morning, everyone. Molly Grover with the Dubuque Area Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to our September Power Hour. Presentations designed for your business, professional, and personal success. Get ready to power up, power through, and power beyond. We have a great presentation for you today, and with us for the introduction is Justin Stinson with IMON. He's one of our sponsors. I would like to recognize all our sponsors that help make Power Hour possible. We have Anderson Corporation, the Friedman Group, Statera, and our sponsor commenter today, Mr. Justin Stinson with I'm On, a board member, a friend, a colleague. Justin, take it away, kind sir.
Great, thank you, Molly. And good morning to all of you. Thank you all for being here for the Chamber's first Power Hour program of the 2020-2021 fiscal year. As Molly mentioned, I'm Justin Stinson. I'm Vice President at IMON Communications, a proud sponsor of Power Hour, along with Anderson Window and Door, the Friedman Group, and Statera Integrated Health and Wellness. We're so excited to have you here virtually for today's presentation. As I'm sure you know by now, IMON is proud to be a local provider delivering high-speed internet, phone, and data service to businesses throughout Dubuque. We continue to expand our footprint and our product offerings. Not to mention, we continue to work hard in the recovery efforts down in Cedar Rapids that just devastated those networks down there. So what sets us apart? We are customer obsessed. We are engaged and committed to our communities we serve, and we have a beautifully engineered network that is second to none. IMON is a company of 135 hardworking employees that impress me every single day. They're out-of-the-box thinkers that find ways to accomplish projects while delivering the highest quality service. We've been selected as one of the coolest places to work here in Dubuque, as well as in Cedar Rapids and in Iowa City. So if your business is frustrated with your telecommunications provider, call me, let us see what we can do for you. You don't have to settle. We've raised the bar. Today's Power Hour presenter is Erin A.J. Armstrong, sharing Leading Yourself First, Personal Growth and Self-Care Through Adversity. AJ is an engineer, a lifestyle entrepreneur, speaker, and thought leader. He's been featured in several mainstream media platforms. AJ is a West Point graduate, former Army football player, founder of 3 startup ventures, and the host of Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews podcast. And personally, as the father of an Army son stationed overseas, thank you for your service and dedication. Please give a warm welcome to AJ Armstrong.
All right, everybody. How's it going today? Thank you so much for that introduction. Really appreciate having the opportunity to share some thoughts and ideas with you guys this morning. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. I just wanted to double check with everyone on the line and make sure that this came across fine. So trying to figure out new softwares is always a good time, but it's
see it.
Okay, right on. Cool. Well, this is great, guys. So when Molly reached out to me, she was talking about some experiences that a lot of business owners were going through, especially during things that happened with COVID-19 and some of the natural disasters that happened in the area as well. And, you know, how do we look at adversity and how do we look at what we can do during times of uncertainty in the marketplace all over the place, right? So one of the ideas we had to talk about actually came from a mentor of mine, and we'll dig into it. And he gave me advice a long time ago called lead yourself first. And because if you can't be strong and have a foundation, it's very difficult to build a business, a life, or any platform of leadership. So that was kind of the inspiration and the idea behind some of the thoughts we're going to share today. So without any further ado, we'll jump right into it. So today's discussion, just wanted to cover a couple different topics. First, just wanted to go over a little background, introduce myself. I want to define for you what it means to lead yourself first. Finally, one of the things we wanted to bring up and discuss is this idea of self-care, how to replenish during times of adversity and gain energy so you can really have that strong foundation, as I mentioned. Finally, where does this look in the world of servant leadership and this acts of giving and leading by example, by giving to other people, by serving the people by which you lead? And then I wanted to give a couple brief take-home exercises you guys can use and apply to kind of actively install some of the material we're going to discuss today. So this is me. My name's Aaron Armstrong, or AJ Armstrong. I go by AJ to my friends, so now we're all friends. We can go by AJ. But my background was I grew up in a small town in Neenah, Wisconsin, and I was a football player in high school. I was really kind of a straight edge guy, super serious about sports, and I had the opportunity to play football for either the University of Wisconsin or the United States Military Academy at West Point. So when I was actively involved in recruiting, Forbes magazine published an article that ranked the top universities in the country. And West Point ended up going to #1. They beat, at that time, they beat Harvard, Yale, Stanford, all the Ivy League schools. And that caught my attention. And I said, you know, if I wanted to have a strong foundation for life, I want to make sure that I'm looking at myself as what I thought to be a leader at the time. I want to go to an institution that shares the same values that I have. So I had to go to the United States Military Academy prep school because, you know, as a football player, my ACT score wasn't high enough to get into the school. So I took a year, and all the football players went to the prep school. And that's where we had a year to kind of get our stuff together, reapply, and then we got into the academy a year later. So when I was at the United, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you put it in presentation mode? Otherwise,
Sure.
the slides aren't advancing.
Yeah. So can you see that now?
Yes, we're good to go. Thank you.
Cool. All right. So this is my slide that I was talking about a little bit, just going over some background on my high school experience as well as moving into my West Point experience. So when I was at the United States Military Academy, I ended up majoring in systems engineering, which is integration of multiple different complex engineering systems for things like space propulsion, vehicle, automotive, ships. You know, it's very active in the defense segment. So from there, I graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Systems Engineering. I moved on to serve my time in the Army, where I was an air defense artillery officer. And when I was in the Army, I took a platoon. I was a platoon leader in a Patriot missile battery. So the Patriot missile systems, you guys might hear things that go on in North Korea or in Iran, shooting Scud missiles over the Baltic Sea and all these types of things that are going on around the world. This was my job, was to shoot those down with the Patriot missile platform. So that was kind of a complex, interesting experience as a technical leader, which kind of got me applying some of the engineering aspects in a technical leadership setting. But within just my first 3 weeks of being in the Army, I was dealing with some very complex, deep issues with soldiers, things like people that were struggling with suicidal ideations, drug addiction, and many things I never thought I would be qualified to discuss, but I was just that last person that I was able to talk to. And it's just one of those things that you're never quite ready to have the conversation until you're the only person there to have the conversation. And at that point, I realized that leadership isn't so much about just kind of standing up there and pointing the fingers as a field general, but it actually is about building really deep connection with people and making it more about understanding the motives and the depth that drives a person. And that was kind of the experience that launched me into saying, I think I really enjoy this leadership thing because you can transform and change lives. So once I was in the military, I had a knee injury during training that ended up manifesting into a osteoarthritis in my knee, which was a degenerative bone disease, and that was a medical disqualifier. So only 18 months into my service, I was immediately medically and honorably discharged from the Army. So that was a really captivating experience because it's kind of scared me. I was expecting to serve for 5 years at least, maybe longer, and now here I was kind of pushed out onto my own in the world. And fortunately, I had read a lot of biographies of impressive men and women in history and things that they have done and accomplished. And there were a series of virtues and values that I looked at as what I could uphold as I go forward in my new life. And I ended up taking a job back near my hometown in Oshkosh as a systems engineering manager. And fortunately, because of my background, I was able to kind of get a job I was probably underqualified for, something I was going to grow into. And the great opportunity that happened with that job was, I tell people, it was really an entrepreneurial experience, and the fact that there was a budget. I was given several $1 million to try to start a new capability within a company, hire the talent to make it work. And if I was doing that with venture capitalists instead of a parent company, that would be seen as a really unique startup experience. And then we were able to bid contracts on this new capability. So that was kind of what launched me into this ambiguous atmosphere that I started to find my career niche with. Shortly after, we were able to use, my income to buy rental properties and get into the idea of real estate investing, where my wife and I started with wholesaling, which was the idea of buying and selling real estate contracts to one another without actively owning the actual real estate, but just trading the contract. Likewise, that moved into buying rental properties. And finally, my wife decided to start a fitness business, a small gym studio where she does one-on-one personal training with primarily women. And that was just, all this was going on at such a quick time frame. And a lot of the success was starting to manifest and outgrow me as a person. So I started to read and study of how I can continue to grow as a person. And that's where I reflected back on some of the mentorship that my mentor had given me back at the academy. It said, lead yourself first. You need to outgrow your environment. So I was kind of explaining all this to some friends, and my West Point friends, my high school friends, some friends in the community were all reaching out to me looking for a lot of advice on how they could build a business, or how they could do these types of, like how they could lead people, and how they could, view the world through this lens of what I was kind of going through. So shortly after that, I started a podcast where I could broadcast all this information out there. And my call to action was really not going to be to monetize the podcast. Well, it was just going to be if people wanted me to consult with them or work with them, I would do that for a fee. And shortly after that, 25, 30 plus universities had reached out to me, universities and companies had reached out to me to do speaking engagements for them and share with them some similar ideas. So that's kind of what led me into where I'm at today, So that's kind of, I guess, the short story of where I am and how I'm here today. But I want to talk a little bit more about what it means to lead yourself first and how this is relevant to you guys today. So this is a great quote by Plato, and it's, the first and best victory is to conquer self. And we're going to talk about some actual strategies to do this. But as I was mentioning before, my mentor, his name's Mike Irwin. And Mike Irwin was the first class I took at West Point was psychology. And he was a student of positive psychology. This is the idea of having a positive mindset going into scenarios and how that can transform your health, your wealth, all sorts of types of things, right? And he was the founder and starter of a nonprofit called Team Red, White, and Blue. So anybody that's served or been around in the military, this nonprofit is the idea of using fitness to increase your mood and your health. And he was just an extremely influential person in my life. He's actually been on my podcast, and he's accomplished so many cool things in his life. But he actually went on to co-write a book called Lead Yourself First. And that's where I've borrowed several philosophies, as well as other philosophies that I've adapted from other mentors in this. And the fact of the matter is that as you guys, as I'm speaking to you all, you're leaders in different ways, your community, your families, maybe your companies, maybe a small business, maybe your church. And it's important that we look at aligning our own values, our own mission internally, so that we can not allow toxicity to fall throughout the entire pyramid. And that's kind of the goal here today. And I'm going to share with you how we can do this through times of adversity, through techniques such as self-care. And also, we're going to wrap this up with talking about some of the servant leadership side. So a lot of I've started to find that a lot of advice that I get from books or from people tends to contradict. There's always some kind of polarity within the literature. So when I'm thinking about this idea of what it means to be a servant leader, a person that's out there to give, you can get very quickly into this idea that was kind of founded by Aristotle called the virtue of the mean. And his idea of the virtue of the mean that Aristotle talked about was that there's excess and defect. You can go in one direction, and the virtue is typically in the middle of excess and defect. So he gives the example of courage, and courage is the virtue. But you have excess, too much courage could be like rash. These are the dudes that go skydiving and, they like catch their parachute in midair, and you probably see them on Red Bull commercials. It becomes rash behavior. And then you have the opposite side, which is defect, people that might cowardice and fear, and they don't actually go out and live their life to the fullest. And then the virtue is courage. Well, and that's what I talk about when I'm talking about the idea of harmony. And I want to look at this. There's excess. There's too much into yourself. If you go and look at self-care, there's people that might just only take care of themselves to where it becomes selfish. On the opposite side, there's people that might be people pleasers, or they might neglect themselves entirely. And you want to look at the harmony. What is the balance and how can we find that balance? And I want to help find the balance today. So I try to simplify some of this complex philosophy into the cup. Some of you guys might have heard the cup example. And the cup is this idea that you are a cup and the energy within you is the liquid within the cup. And this can fluctuate depending on lots of different things. It can fluctuate daily, it can fluctuate weekly, monthly. And I am a big believer, if you've actually ever, listened or read some of my material, I talk about this idea that there's three resources in life that we can use and apply. There's time, there's energy, and there's money. And I've actually mathematically proved that those are all related as well. So if you're ever interested in that, we can talk about that sometime. But the idea is that energy is one of those things that we can use and apply in our life. And if we don't keep our cup full, it becomes very difficult to find things like success. So one of the questions is, where are you falling in this current season of life right now? Are you in the no energy camp? Are you full of energy camp? Or are you somewhere in the middle? Because it's going to definitely depend on what your strategy is going to be going forward. Now, I always like to just place in your mind very quickly as we look at the idea of the introvert and the extrovert. The introvert is, generally speaking, somebody that gains energy from solitude and isolation, and they like to have their alone time. That's typically where they can recharge or fill up their cup in a way. And you look at the extrovert, which usually has some kind of social implication. Being around people usually rejuvenates them and fills up their cup. So keep that in mind as well, as where do you fall on the scale today, and where do you fall on the introvert extrovert side? Excuse me. So the idea of self-care in this world of leading yourself first, of keeping your cup full, is to understand that this is a problem. We are humans struggling through things in our business. We're struggling through things in life. We're struggling through things with our family. We're struggling through things in our community, natural disaster. All these things come up into our life, and you look at this little faucet at the bottom, and it's adversity, constantly draining our cup at a steady rate of just problem after problem, and it never seems to go away. And it's constantly pulling our energy. So it becomes very difficult to keep our energy full. So one of the things that we can do to avoid loss of energy, avoid unhappiness, depression, anxiety, poor quality of living, is to find ways to fill that cup up. So we have no energy, we have little energy, and we have this new faucet of energy. And these topics today are going to be some of the things I want to touch on with you guys to explain how you can use health, solitude, social atmosphere, wealth, spiritual growth, and contribution as a tool to turn on the faucet to keep your cup full so you have more energy to apply to the world. This is actually funny. When I was at West Point, it was just so many things going on in my life. There was your military, your academic, your physical. I was playing football. There was so much was happening that I was just becoming so emotionally drained. It was just wrecking my entire life because I couldn't think, I couldn't do anything. So I reached out to a coach on our football team who happened to be a grad. And I was explaining this problem to him. I said, my cup is completely empty. I don't have anything else to give. And he just said something really funny, and it seems so straightforward. And he's just like, well, how much sleep are you getting at night? I said, I'm only getting 1 or 2 hours of sleep a night. I don't have time, and I still can't get all my homework done. I still can't get everything done. And he said, well, here's the thing. Whatever you do, there will not be enough time in the day to get through, to do all the things that are expected of you at the academy. So you got to find the right things. And he said, what I did was no matter what, get 8 hours of sleep. And I said, what? He's like, yeah, 8 hours of sleep. You're going to miss some homework assignments. You're going to miss some things, but that's going to keep your cup full. You're going to have enough energy if you can at least wake up with a fighting chance. And it's funny, later on, I was reading a story about Jeff Bezos, and this is Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, the owner, the richest man in the world. And one of his #1 rules to success is no matter what, get 8 hours of sleep. And I thought this was funny as an idea of making sure you keep your energy full. And I, to this day, no matter what, I drop what I need to do at 8 hours. But some of these topics are going to be very relevant to maintaining that high energy throughout the day. So let's dig into the first one. And this is backed by 3 studies, but there's actually kind of overwhelming amount of literature on the topic of health, but more specifically, the idea of exercising to increase your mood. So the first study I'll point your attention to is Penn State University had linked physiological health to actual productivity in the workplace. So companies were starting to find that healthier employees were actually some of the better employees, believe it or not. I think this was kind of intuitive to some level, but now we're starting to see research that popped up, and then newer companies have started to make this part of their work experience. They started to show having workout facilities on campus. They started to have incentives for people that were being active. And these were all things that were not only geared to reduction in health insurance fees, but also in the idea that productivity increased with health. So this was kind of a cool idea. And we're starting to see this now come out in the scientific evidence. The second is not just young people at the workplace, but actually with older active adults. So they showed that chronic exercise is associated with improved mood for older people. So chronic exercise or habitual exercise, things that are consistently happening, is increasing the mood with older adults. And finally, we also saw that not just chronic exercise, but acute exercise. In this journal of psychoschematic research by had identified that having small bits of exercise immediately following showed higher levels of cognitive function as well. So we're seeing now several examples of the power of using exercise in your life. And the key takeaway I've bolded at the bottom: acute or habitual exercising can radically improve your mood, productivity, and mental health. In fact, my wife and I had the opportunity to see Tony Robbins live in Chicago. And he had talked about the idea that your physiology can improve your psychology. And one of the things he talks about doing is simple exercises as far as getting pumped up before you go do things, because the amount of blood flow, the hormone release, and as well as many other things can improve your cognitive function immediately following that bout of exercise. So something to think about for you all, the idea of, if you are already exercising, strategically placing exercises in front of important events, or acutely exercising, or just maybe just doing some jumping jacks before something that requires high cognitive function. So these are some cool techniques that I've learned and my wife has learned as well, being in the fitness business. The second topic here is this polarity a little bit between solitude and socialization. So remember our introverts versus extroverts. I asked you guys kind of think where you might fall on this. The introverts would probably lean towards an idea of solitude to refill their cup, to recharge, where an extrovert might look at the idea of being in a social environment to recharge their cup. And the fact of the matter is that both of these, regardless of where you fall, I don't care how introverted you are, you require social attention, and this is backed by studies as well. So the first is a Harvard Health Journal that actually did some research on the idea of meditation and cognitive function. And the idea of meditating could reduce the amount of mental errors that people would experience in different complex functionality that they go through in their different careers. So the idea of putting yourself in an isolated place, taking deep breaths, and putting yourself in a physiological calming can actually improve the amount of functionality you have in daily routines in your occupation. And I thought that was really interesting, because not only are we seeing that solitude can improve your energy, but it'll improve your productivity. And this is really important for people to understand that, this could be just 15 minutes in isolation with your eyes closed, where you're not sleeping, but you're just kind of reflecting or looking forward. And actually, a central theme in Mike Irwin's book, Lead Yourself First, is the idea of leaders needing to take that time of solitude to gather information and collect it from people around you, but having enough time to sit there, reflect, and think about what's been happening and put that story together and synchronize, because oftentimes some of the best ideas come when you can finally have time to synchronize or load all of those ideas. But additionally, the introverts that I tend to hang out with a lot, because I seem to be extroverted and that just works, but they always like to say they don't need any social activity, or that very little, or they prefer to just sit in a nice quiet room and read all day. But there's actually a lot of research that predicted that loneliness actually improves or increases anxiety, stress, depression, and mental health issues over time. So this was Emerald Insight published this article. And so we're seeing that social interaction is necessary to reduce depression, stress, anxiety, all these types of things. But there's also a balance of having enough solitude. So I think that Paul Tillich, the great Christian philosopher, said, loneliness expresses the pain of being alone, and solitude expresses the glory of being alone. And I think that's just a poetic and beautiful way of saying this, because we need both. We need to have enough time for solitude. People that are busy, that have big families, that have a lot going on might say like, hey man, you don't have kids yet, try getting some solitude or whatever. It's about finding that time for yourself to reflect and have that isolation, even if it's 10 to 15 minutes. Most experts swear by having 10 to 15 minutes in isolation to do some reflection and prayer. Likewise, going through a social calendar, if you will. So one of my friends, one of the things I started doing after the new year was I would actually go through my entire phone contact list and make sure that I started reaching out to some of my friends. So, January would be A and B, February would be B and C, and I would just go every day, do a new person in the list and just reach out to them and see how it's going. And that's kind of one of the great ideas for networking, as well as just maintaining friendships. So this is an interesting balance. The next slide is on wealth, and I didn't want to talk too much on this because there's obviously so much to this, and we all fall in different categories. But the key takeaway is that there's a study that came out actually by the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health that talks about people that were in the lowest quintile, so the bottom 20% of socioeconomic classes in this study that they looked at, experienced some of the greatest anxiety and depression symptoms as it related to money, which kind of makes sense. People that struggle with money, maybe struggling to make payments on things, maybe struggling to live, we're starting to see some of the highest amounts of anxiety. So the key takeaway on this slide is to look at, how do we avoid the bottom? How do we avoid the stress that comes with money? How do we avoid all the different issues that come up with money in a way? So I'm a big Dave Ramsey fan. I'm probably 80-20 on Dave Ramsey, where I agree with him for almost everything, except for about 20% when it comes to some of the real estate stuff. But other than that, he talks about the idea of budgeting and how it can be beneficial for not only people who are in lower tiers of the socioeconomic demographic, but also some of the people that are wealthy who want to look at ways of increasing income, people that are on growth minded, and you want to break down the in versus the out. So this is a really simple reminder that just shows that money can be an issue, and if you're neglecting it because you think that money and happiness are irrelevant, well, actually it's the lack of money that can show discomfort. So I write here, money won't buy happiness, but a lack of it will result in disappointment and empirically speaking, a low or a high amount of anxiety and possible depression as well. So if you have any questions on this, feel free to reach out or whatever, but Dave Ramsey is a great resource you guys can look at. And budgeting is one of the best strategies to understand how you can avoid that lowest quintile of the socioeconomic demographic. Like I said, big question, but certainly worth talking about, because when we're talking about how do we refill our cup, it's impossible to talk about adversity without talking about money at some level, because money seems to always be a problem, no matter how much of it you have or do not have. So that's something I wanted to just briefly touch on. But finally, we look at this idea of spiritual growth and contribution as a way of filling up our cup. So this is a deep existential question that philosophers and theologians have been wrestling with for centuries. And it's the idea of really determining your divine purpose. And excuse me, someone like me, I believe we are created, and I believe we're created for a reason. And I believe finding that reason and finding that purpose should become our life's work, and should become things that we do every day. And don't take just the philosophical mist of that conversation and think that there's no scientific evidence. But we actually see in Harvard University, Harvard Health actually published an article just recently about how people that are looking or searching for meaning in their life see not only better mental health, but better physical health, because they have a drive, they have a will, they have a need to continue to live. So there's not only philosophical curiosity that's answered by this search for meaning and purpose, but there's also physical health that can be improved by having something to live for. And the hard question is, especially to answer in the next couple minutes or 30 or 40 seconds, is how do you find out what that thing is? And my quickest possible answer that can often help people is this technique I call the 5 whys, and it's based off of the manufacturing technique. So some people work in manufacturing or work for or have experience in Lean Six Sigma, and one of the ways that they root cause problems is they ask a question why 5 times, and they'll say, well, why is this happening? And they say, well, why is this happening? And just like a 4-year-old, they get down finally to this deep meaning of the root cause of the issue. And I think if you can use that technique and ask that about your life, it'll also improve the ability to see what your mission or your purpose could be. And it's not necessarily as easy to answer on a couple question slide, but it's certainly something to ponder, because the more meaning and purpose, the more drive and motive you're going to have going into whatever adversity you might face. And that'll fill up your cup so that you're going to be able to keep that high energy and high performance going forward. So finally, you've looked at health, solitude, your social life, the wealth, you've solved some of these problems, you have spiritual growth. Now we look at this idea of contribution. And this is, I think, what it really means to lead yourself first. You look at self-care, filling up that cup, improving your energy for the reason that you can be a servant, that you can lead others, and that you can take this cup and you can fill up the other people's cups. If you notice, social, part of this is being able to interact with other people, give them life advice, give them meaning, give them purpose, show them some of the wisdom you might have in your life. And these are, you might say, well, I'm not really a leader. It's like, well, you might be a leader in your family. You might lead your children. You might lead people in your church. You might lead your employees. You might lead your community. All of us are leaders in different ways, and all of us certainly carry influence. So once you can use techniques like self-care to improve your energy, you can finally take that energy and redistribute accordingly to the people that you serve. So this was a quote by John C. Maxwell that kind of captures the idea of servant leadership, where he says, true leadership must be for the benefit of the followers, not to enrich the leader. So when you think back to that balance, that what is selfish and what is just giving too much of my cup out. It's like you need to refill the cup, but you also need to pour that into other people that you serve. And that's this idea of leading yourself first. Fill the cup, redistribute, take care of what I need to take care of so that I can give as much as possible to other people. Let's get this faucet going. So finally, I have a couple different take-home exercises that you guys can try that summarize everything we talked about today. But these are some challenges I would ask you to do. If you're not doing them already, maybe you could, or if you're already doing them, you could increase this a little bit. So the first one is what we talked about, exercise weekly if you can. And there's other things with diet as well, like adding, teas and high antioxidants and berries have been shown to improve cognitive function as well. Adding a significant amount of fats to your diet can improve cognitive function. But the idea of exercising, we know there's just overwhelming amount of scientific evidence that shows that this increases your productivity, mental health, and positive mood. So if you could add even just acute instances of exercise, whether that's just jumping up and down, doing some jumping jacks before a phone call or something like that, that can really improve. Second, try to find 10 to 15 minutes of alone time to reflect in silence, to go in some deep prayer with God, or maybe just have some type of meditation practice. That'll overall improve your cognitive function. The third is to not neglect your social life. This could be with your friends, coworkers, or whatever ways you can do to avoid loneliness. So like I said, I gave you an example of what I do to kind of go through my phone contact list to make sure I'm not leaving any friends or neglecting anybody or any business contacts, but have a systematic way of staying connected with others. The fourth is to deep dive your budget. It doesn't matter if you think that you're doing really well for yourself as well. I think if you look at the way your income versus your expenses, there's also strategies and techniques to increase your income that you could look at. Adding a side hustle, improving your salary, negotiating for more money in the workplace, trying to gain more customers. Having a constant reflection on that can help solve this issue of money that tends to drain a lot of our energy. Then the fourth thing here we have, or the fifth thing we have, conduct the 5 why test. Try to do some reflection to find out what is my purpose in my life. And some people get kind of scared with that question. I think that's weird, or that's kind of woo-woo, or whatever it is. But I think it's very helpful to not only understand exactly the direction you're going, but also to look at why am I here? how am I going to serve other people if I don't really know exactly where I'm going? It becomes very difficult. And the final question is, serve others when you can. Try to help when you feel fulfilled, when you feel your cup is filling up. It's time to really share that with other people who need it, because that's really what servant leadership is all about. So that's kind of the end of my presentation today. One little fun tip you guys can do is actually there's this QR code where if you aim your camera phone right up to it, it'll take you to my LinkedIn, and we can connect on LinkedIn that way. And you can actually find this on your own LinkedIn if you want to connect with other people that way. So if you wanted to not have to punch in all these different links to stay connected with me, you're certainly welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn and have any questions or anything there. But I think we have a little time for questions, if I'm not mistaken. So that kind of wraps up today's discussion for me.
Thank you so much, AJ. Really appreciate it. I'm checking the chat right now. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to put it in there. If it's something that needs extra explanation, I can always unmute you as well. So we'll give
Sure.
everybody a second to type anything in. I don't see anything coming in at this moment, but I appreciate you giving out all of your information. I think that's going to be very helpful for anybody. So if you feel like following up with AJ after this, oh, hold on, let me see here as I've got one question for you. Who is your favorite self-help guru?
Oh man.
Pick just one.
Well, I think that something that's really important to me is my faith. So I would say that, I follow the teachings of Christianity, the teachings of Jesus. So that would probably be my number one. If you're looking for a secular example, I'm a big fan of Tony Robbins as well. So, but yeah, they.
Actually, I have a question for you. So if you had one piece of advice that you could tell your past self, what would it be?
That's a great question. One of the things that I think I would look at the most is to voraciously seek truth, really ask the hard questions, the existential questions, the deep questions. It's so easy to get just caught up in what's going on. And like we saw that little faucet of adversity that comes up, and just kind of just zooming in on the immediate fires that pop up every single day, but taking some time to ask some of the bigger questions, origin, meaning, morality, destiny. What do those look like for you? And framing your worldview so you can have a good ethical business framework to apply throughout life.
Well, like I said, I don't see anything else coming in. So I just want to thank everybody for being here for our first Power Hour of the 2021 fiscal year. Thank you again to our Power Hour sponsors, I'm On Communication, Anderson Window and Door, the Friedman Group, and Statera Integrated Health and Wellness Solutions. We look forward to seeing everybody next month on October 13th for a panel of political analysts as we enter election season. So thank you all so much, and have a great short week. Thank you so much, AJ.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me.